Smoke blurred the horizon, curling over treetops on a distant Pacific island as Paul Pappy gun crouched in the shadow of a battered B-25 bomber. The air was thick and heavy, every breath carrying the scent of oil, fear, and hope. Paul was not a decorated general or a wealthy magnate. He was an engineer, a father whose family was swept up in the unthinkable chaos of war. Behind his weathered hands were scars not just from machinery, but from years spent fighting invisible battles, the battles of not enough. Not enough parts, not enough money, not enough backing from those supposed to care. The war, with its monster machines and grand strategies, never remembered these struggles. It never honored the ones who, tucked away in makeshift hangars, worked with nothing but resourcefulness and a stubborn pulse of faith. Paul stared at the rows of grounded planes. Official verdict: obsolete. Too slow, too wide, too vulnerable. Supplies were rationed and priorities set by others. He petitioned for help and was told, "That's impossible," or worse, "That's not our problem." That phrase bit deep because it reminded him of an older, quieter struggle, one that anyone who's ever worried about their family, their job, or the threadbare number in their bank account has felt. A voice that whispers, "If you don't have the money, if you don't have the support, you don't have the right to try." Paul heard it louder on nights when even the crickets fell silent, and he wondered if the story he'd started would ever get a chance to be finished. But it wasn't just duty that sent him back to the drawing board again and again. It was that crushing, complex knot inside, the sense of letting people down, of being powerless, endlessly circling the cul-de-sac of scarcity. Bills piling up, promises to his children, the fear that he'd done everything right, but the world might still crush him. Because if war is a backdrop here, its real setting is familiar to so many. The battle not only against overwhelming obstacles, but against the voice that says, "Maybe this is simply your limit." Paul's story isn't about grand statements or overnight victories. On the contrary, his was a world of no and not yet, the grainy fatigue of going to work each day with empty pockets and heavier doubts. There were moments when it felt like he was fighting not just the enemy, but a silent, invisible current holding him underwater. Colleagues who shrugged, commanders who dismissed, and the gnawing anxiety that all his hands-on skills, his wild problem-solving, were nothing in a system that loved to measure worth in money, rank, and connections. Still, every bolt tightened, every sleepless sketch on a crumpled napkin was a kind of rebellion, a defiant belief that barriers matter less than creative, relentless action. You may not be standing in the shadow of an old bomber or hearing the distant thrum of enemy planes, but perhaps you know what it's like to feel the world is moving faster than you can keep up, that your dreams are being grounded by someone else's rules, or by the cold arithmetic of not enough money, time, or experience. Maybe you wake up with a restless knot in your gut, wondering how you'll make it through the month. Perhaps you grieve for opportunities you're convinced are out of reach because you don't have the resources or connections others seem to take for granted. There might be a part of you right now that feels stuck behind enemy lines, held back not just by circumstance, but by a vision of yourself that's been misshapen by setbacks, discouragement, or the endless wait for things to change on their own. Paul's journey set in motion something more than technological innovation. It summoned parts of himself he rarely showed. Not just the hard-edged tinkerer, but the loving father, the frustrated underdog, the relentless optimist directing his fury at the next solution. That friction, the tension between despair and creativity, limitation and audacious possibility, became the secret engine powering his most radical moments. It's that hidden engine, forged when desperation meets ingenuity, that quietly alters destinies and reshapes lives. As you draw closer to this story, you might recognize echoes of your own, a time when you lost belief or burned with a fire no one else understood. You will see how Paul's greatest breakthroughs did not arrive through comfort, but through the sharp ache of necessity. In the space where resources ran out, his imagination broke free. His journey is an invitation to look again at your own supposed dead ends, the financial blocks, the dismissive no's, and discover the wellspring of power that lives precisely where the world says you have none. Ahead lies the heart of this adventure, a map of both inner and outer battlefields, charting the emotional and mental terrain that can either anchor us in scarcity or launch us into genuine abundance. By the end, you may discover that the hardest moments, the stings of lack, the empty accounts, the shut doors, hold far more promise than you ever dreamed. The challenge is not just to survive these moments, but to use them as the raw material for something extraordinary. And as this journey unfolds, you'll begin to understand how limitation, properly harnessed, can become your greatest asset, forging a path toward a kind of mastery that no circumstance can take away. Pappy Gunn's shop wasn't the sort of place that invited daydreams. With tools scattered haphazardly and oil staining his coveralls, the air sparkled with the buzz of relentless work rather than promises of glory. Within those four battered walls, he moved differently now. No longer pleading for what might never come, he was awake to a new reality, a quiet, restless alertness to the roots below every money belief tangled in the shadows of his mind. It wasn't as simple as digging up old lessons. It was about tracing them to their source, peeling the layers to see not just where his thoughts came from, but why they clung so tightly. In the dim light one evening, as dusk pressed gently against the stained window panes, Lucy entered, carrying a chipped mug of coffee. She was his daughter, and her presence always softened the sharp clatter of metal. She watched her father in silence, the distance between them more psychological than physical. He paused, sensing her unspoken question, the kind that sits in the pause between the inhale and the spoken word. "Dad," she ventured, her voice catching, "did you always see the world this way? Like a puzzle to be solved, not a dead end?" The question hung, pulsing. He glanced at the blueprint in his hand, tracing memories as if searching for a missing screw. "It's strange, Lucy," he replied, setting the plans down. "You start out thinking money is just about what you have or don't. But when I was your age, I watched Grandma count pennies for bread, and Grandpa curse his luck at the dinner table. You learn early. Scarcity is inherited just as surely as the color of your eyes." Her fingers tightened around the mug. She hadn't expected such candor, but the honesty invited her in. Both stood under the invisible weight of beliefs passed like heirlooms, saving every scrape, fearing every downturn, mistrusting good fortune lest it run dry. These silent scripts, never spoken aloud, handed down with every sigh and cautious decision, shaped the way she, too, viewed risk and reward. Elsewhere, a colonel barked orders. The war machine moved on clockwork schedules, looping each day in a pattern as rigid as tradition. Pappy knew the patterns weren't only military. Cultures, like armies, crafted narratives of money, who should have it, who must go without, and how one was meant to behave in its presence. In crew tents and at kitchen tables, jokes about filthy rich and starving artists were exchanged as easily as rations. The language stuck even when the truth was more nuanced. For Lucy, the realization landed in fragments. She remembered her mother's gentle warnings to always keep a little tucked away for a rainy day, well-meaning, but calculated to foster worry. At school, classmates divided neatly. Those who brought crisp dollar bills, others with patched coats and hastily packed lunches. Small, incidental details fused into a deep-seated lens, coloring her expectations about what was achievable, who was worthy, and how safe it was to even want more. On a stormy night, while the generator's hum played counterpoint to Pappy's thoughts, he realized something had shifted for him. He didn't just see inherited beliefs, he saw their limitations. These mental hand-me-downs, stitched together by family, society, even national pride, could turn into invisible shackles. But the moment he recognized them, he was free to ask, "Are these even mine? Or have I been living stories meant for someone else?" Lucy, touching the edge of the blueprint, dared to consider the possibility. If beliefs could be inherited, perhaps they could be rewritten. She imagined what it would feel like to move past the scripts she'd always known. The notion unsettled her, but there was hope in the unease, a hope kindled by the knowledge that, if a pattern could be established, perhaps it could also be undone. In that small encounter, set against the chaos outside, the Guns explored a new dimension of inheritance, one not of land or riches, but of perspective. Here was where the war was truly fought, not just in the air or across oceans, but in the quiet, everyday moments where a belief could shift with awareness, and the old scripts could finally be named. Only then could something radically new begin to grow. Thunder rolled low outside the hangar, punctuating an afternoon heavy with humidity and anticipation. Inside, Pappy stood with his arms folded, surveying the B-25 framed by shadow and shafts of sun. His mechanic, Al, sidled up, clutching a bundle of tattered notes and a half-crushed pack of cigarettes. "See, Pappy, people talk like the only way to win is to play by the book," Al said, striking a match and squinting through the smoke. "But what if the book was written for yesterday's war?" Pappy's jaw tightened. Without glancing over, he replied, "Or written by those who never fixed anything in their lives." There was a kind of dogged defiance in his tone, an urge to reach beyond rules that had only ever limited, never liberated. As the sky flashed again, the landscape inside the hangar shifted, too. This was not a space for men trapped by doctrine. It was a crucible for invention. Unbeknownst to the official command, Pappy and Al had drafted daring modifications. They'd studied the underbelly of the B-25, realizing that traditional payloads, while safe, left its potential untapped. Risk flickered between them like an unspoken truce. Both knew they walked a thin line. Both knew it was necessary. In wartime, as in business, the rut of accepted wisdom was often deeper than any crater outside. Pappy's hand hovered over a stack of parts salvaged from scrapped machinery, a testament to both resourcefulness and frustration. Yet, it dawned on him that these useless pieces, when reassembled to fire forward rather than downward, could turn the bomber from a cautious participant into an aggressive predator. The idea was unorthodox, and its boldness unsettled even Al. But what if it backfires? Al asked, voice barely above a whisper. Rather than dismiss the doubt, Pappy acknowledged it. "If I let the odds paralyze me, nothing moves forward. Besides, true failure isn't blowing up in the sky. It's rotting on the ground because you never tried." And so, with trembling hands and pounding hearts, they rewired, refitted, and rerouted every system that would yield. The danger was real. The redesigned bomber might stall, or worse, take them with it. But there was a kind of sacred clarity in having nothing left to lose, a clarity that cut through hesitation and sparked true transformation. Contrast this with the world outside the hangar, where protocol sat like heavy armor on every decision. Pilots swapped stories about the right way to handle an emergency, but Pappy saw the flaw. The right way had been shaped by someone else's success, someone else's set of circumstances. In the field of ingenuity, context was king, and those who couldn't adapt fell behind. As modification progressed, word trickled out. Skeptics raised eyebrows, critics grumbled about wasted time, and some even murmured of insubordination. But Pappy's definition of insubordination was different. To him, the gravest disloyalty was to stagnate, to refuse to use every sliver of wit when lives, when family, hung in the balance. This crucible forced him to develop a philosophy. Innovation is not a luxury reserved for those flush with resources. Instead, it flourishes most when boundaries seem absolute, when necessity burns hottest. Midnight came and went, the cold settling in. Lucy tiptoed in, sensing the current of anticipation. Al gently handed her a handful of reconfigured bullets. "Your father's changing the very language of these machines," he said, eyes full of pride. Lucy ran her fingers over the cold metal, feeling the weight of hope and risk packed into each round. She realized, in that silent moment, that limits become legends when one's vision outpaces the doubts echoing from every corner. Now, consider for yourself, when faced with a financial dead end, do you measure your options by the book, or do you allow curiosity and grit to jolt you into action? Sometimes, the fix you seek exists not in following what's always been done, but in giving yourself permission to try what's never been imagined. When accustomed to seeing only obstacles, every new attempt may feel like mutiny. Yet, like Pappy and Al, anyone who chooses to wield ingenuity as their compass can utterly transform the landscape of possibility. The difference between collapse and breakthrough is often just a single, audacious question, and the courage to answer it with action. A pale dawn crept along the horizon, brushing the hangar windows and outlining every smear of grease, every forgotten wrench. As the mechanics unwound from a night spent in tight, silent labors, something intangible shimmered in the air, a shifting, almost magnetic pull drawing their attention toward possibility rather than limitation. Lucy, ever watchful, recognized the change, not simply in the machinery or blueprints, but in the subtle recalibration of her father's focus. While before every setback loomed like a mountain, now solutions sprang not from logic alone, but from an untapped well of internal resources. It was as if the absence of external support had exposed a terrain of the psyche that had, until now, been ignored. Yet the transformation was neither loud nor swift. It began, surprisingly, in the act of gratitude, a ritual Lucy observed one morning when Pappy paused, hands heavy with the day's tasks, and murmured thanks for the smallest of victories, a salvaged bolt, a moment of laughter with Al, an hour of peace before the noise of command. She saw how, in that pause, the atmosphere shifted, opened subtle doors that worry and urgency had sealed shut. Underneath fatigue, gratitude acted as a solvent, quietly dissolving resentment that could otherwise harden into cynicism. Simultaneously, Lucy took up a battered notebook, its edges dog-eared by months in her pocket, and began jotting brief fragments, lists of challenges faced, flashes of inspiration from odd places, and patterns emerging from routine struggles. The act of putting pen to paper sharpened her perception. Suddenly, she recognized themes and clues she'd previously dismissed. When facing fiercely persistent issues, supplies running low, another shipment delayed, she discovered that articulating them on the page transformed obstacles into solvable pieces of a larger puzzle. Her daily entries became a private archive of growth, unmasking not just hurdles, but the momentum gained through persistence. Tapping deeper into that wellspring, Pappy began to use visualization as a counterweight against the trepidation gnawing at the corners of uncertainty. After all, the real battlefield was not only above the clouds, but in his own imagination. Each night, as the war sounds faded into a distant drone, he would close his eyes and picture the bombers soaring, stronger and faster, the modifications working flawlessly, the mission succeeding not out of blind hope, but through the vivid rehearsal of each crucial step. Visualization gave him a sense of agency before the evidence existed. For the first time, the future wasn't defined by past disappointments, but by an image forged and reinforced with conviction. Further amplifying these shifts, Al quietly instituted a new morning rhythm with the crew, a moment of shared intention before the engines even started. Each mechanic, regardless of rank, named one thing they aimed to improve: a technical skill, a relationship, an attitude. At first, it drew raised eyebrows and shy laughter. Gradually, though, the ritual bred accountability and commitment, as each man began looking for opportunities to transform that intention from mind to matter. The hangar became less a place of burden, more a ground for experimentation, every setback now a data point rather than a source of shame. These small but deliberate shifts spilled beyond the hangar. On supply runs, Lucy found herself smiling and connecting with local villagers, building a web of relationships that, over time, procured resources no official channel could access. In the mess hall, Pappy coached a trembling young pilot to see past a near-fatal failure, not as a punishment, but as a lesson leading him towards sharper decision-making. Bit by bit, as each person translated mindset work into focused, repeatable action, results compounded. Order replaced chaos. Hope became tangible, visible as the scattered planes began to move again, renewed with life. This synergy between internal cultivation and external action meant that habits no longer emerged as chores, but as tools for translating vision into reality. Where once everyone awaited orders or luck, now agency and intentionality were the new currency. Lucy, scribbling a quick line, "Today, I will meet uncertainty with curiosity," felt the tremor of anticipation, a quiet promise that each page, each practice, could be the lever that moves mountains. From the far end of the airstrip, a restless wind carried the clamor of distant engines. Worried faces clustered around the morning's repair manifest, each name etched in grease and hope. In a corner of the hangar, Lucy lingered, her gaze drawn not to the aircraft themselves, but to her father's posture, upright, almost defiant, eyes fixed on a schematic that looked different from yesterday's. He called out, "Al, check these dimensions one more time. This isn't just about function. There's strategy woven into every bolt." Al, lips pursed in concentration, nodded without question. What dawned between them was more than functional redesign. It was a subtle evolution in identity. Here, the ordinary became extraordinary through intention, not accident. Delving further, Lucy noticed her father adopting gestures and mannerisms that weren't his only weeks prior. Authority, once imposed by circumstance, began radiating from within. Where once he second-guessed decisions, now he navigated with a rare calm, every word measured yet potent. This confidence wasn't arrogance, it was quiet ownership. Even the crew responded, straightening shoulders and matching his tone, unconsciously echoing his pace. In time, the group dynamic shifted from reliance on external validation to leaning on self-elected standards, forged in crisis but solidified by trust in renewed capability. A few days into this shift, Lucy sat beside one of the youngest mechanics, Theo, as he fumbled over a stubborn Conrad. Sweat beaded on his brow, frustration mounting. Yet, as she quietly encouraged him to retrace his steps and experiment, the tension in his hands faded. He muttered, almost to himself, "If Pappy can flip the script on what's possible, maybe I can, too." That moment wasn't about the Conrad at all. It was an informal initiation from observer to participant, Theo beginning to identify as a contributor rather than a replaceable cog. It occurred to Lucy that identity could be contagious. Agency, once ignited, spreads through a group as rapidly as an oil fire, but with none of the devastation, only shared momentum. What's vital to highlight here is the radical reimagining of what it means to be the kind of person who, in place of old self-images shaped by scarcity or self-doubt, now lived a narrative more akin to, "I am the architect of solutions. I am the steward of what is possible." Paul Pappy Gunn, once prisoner of circumstance, became architect of his own story. The lines between role and identity blurred with every act of courage and refusal to retreat. Those around him responded in kind, their own internal biographies rewritten with every challenge conquered. Meanwhile, Lucy noticed her father staying long after sunset, sketching not just bomber modifications, but jotting side notes about leadership and responsibility. He made lists, skills to learn, people to mentor, traits he admired in pilots and mechanics alike. Far from amassing power for its own sake, Pappy was constructing a new ethos, one that grounded prosperity in purpose. There was no backbone in shortcuts, no future in ethics neglected. When a civilian supply officer offered a questionable shortcut, Pappy's refusal was immediate. "If I win by cutting corners, I lose something deeper." This moral clarity projected onto the crew. Gradually, ethical choices became reflex rather than struggle. The emotional landscape transformed as well. A space that once bred silent rivalries or mistrust now brimmed with collaboration, jokes tossed across the bays, and shared pride in each success. As Lucy surveyed the evolving scene, she understood that prosperity unattached to meaning or service quickly decays. Mere accumulation is weight, but wealth tethered to collective progress and care gains a gravity that draws good fortune closer. Moreover, hardship sculpted not only technical proficiency, but profound emotional maturity. In moments when supply chains frayed or orders were botched, the crew responded not with blame or despair, but with a deeper capacity for patience and perspective. They had not just learned to fix planes, they had learned to steward adversity, to frame every hardship as a chapter in their new identity as masters of their own destiny. Now, picture stepping into your world with that very presence, allowing past frustration to become the forge for a story in which you lead yourself and others as a steward, not just a survivor. What if every no in your journey became a tool for carving out a legacy that blends principle, emotional depth, and prosperity? The journey to self-mastery is not some distant summit reached only by the privileged. It is built, repaired, and flown, one creative act, one courageous refusal, one moment of integrity at a time. As dusk settled over the makeshift airstrip, the old windsock flapped listlessly above a tangle of supply crates. Pappy's silhouette was cast long on the cracked concrete, but tonight, He moved with a singular focus, eyes clear, breath even, as if the tension in the air gave him a sharper edge. Rather than retreat to his blueprints, he walked the length of the runway and paused next to Sergeant Bishop, a man whose quick wit usually masked a restless anxiety. Bishop, hands shoved deeply into his pockets, gazed at the horizon where the sky hinted at tomorrow's uncertainty. "You ever get tired of waiting for someone to give you a green light?" Bishop muttered, voice carrying under the low hum of distant machinery. Pappy didn't answer immediately. He knelt to inspect a bent-wheel strut, then straightened with a slow determination. "The green light isn't coming," he said, his tone almost gentle. "We choose our own signals out here." That quiet declaration shifted something, subtle as a tremor in the earth. The men here weren't seeking permission. Necessity and vision had transformed them from passive cogs into active architects of their fate. Simultaneously, Lucy made her way through a dimly illuminated storeroom, her flashlight cutting a narrow path across rows of forgotten parts. Her eyes darted from shelf to shelf. Alternators, cracked gauges, spools of wire no longer gleaming. Instead of moving with a checklist's rigidity, she scanned for potential, silently brainstorming how each overlooked object could serve some new purpose. Discovering an unused radio, she tested it against a jumble of wires, and a faint burst of static jolted her with an unexpected thrill. She scribbled a note to herself, "Unused does not equal useless." These spur-of-the-moment experiments evolved into a silent competition among the crew, to see not just what needed fixing, but what could be reimagined to meet tomorrow's challenges head-on. Overlaying these small acts of reinvention was an evolving dynamic. The flow of information moved in all directions now. Not only did the newcomers challenge the old hands with sharp, probing questions, but the veterans found themselves describing why certain rules existed at all. Through conversation and debate, practical wisdom intermingled with raw, disruptive curiosity. The result? Nightly gatherings in the hangar after official lights out, as if necessity itself had become the beacon calling them to huddle together. Over mugs of scalding coffee, they spun out possible futures for the battered fleet. Some wild, some practical, all colored by a fierce unwillingness to wait for solutions to simply land in their laps. Meanwhile, a subtle but powerful sense of communal momentum began to build. Instead of measuring progress only in repaired bombers or finished sorties, every member started tracking intangible wins: how fast they adapted to a new part shortage, how effectively they rerouted supply convoys, how deeply they listened to a junior mechanic's wild idea rather than dismissing it outright. Even failure shifted its meaning. If a modification didn't pan out, it became a stepping stone, a crucial variable in the unfolding formula for success. No longer were mistakes hidden or ignored. Instead, they were dissected collectively, fueling a culture where growth outpaced ego. Pappy quietly encouraged this trend, sometimes with a word, more often with a loaded silence that left space for others to step into leadership. When the youngest gunner proposed a new mounting angle for ammunition feeds, Pappy's only response was a steady stare, followed by a single nod. Permission was neither granted nor withheld. It simply became irrelevant. Authority was distributed and earned, not conferred. Innovation had become an everyday language, delivered in half-joking challenges issued during dinner and in serious technical debates beside oil-streaked engines. For you, this evolving microcosm signals something critical about sustained transformation. Acting from necessity once might spark a temporary breakthrough, but it's the ongoing commitment to disciplined experimentation, shared risk-taking, and a willingness to dismantle unhelpful traditions that forges genuine evolution. The night air on the airstrip, thick with tension and camaraderie, is where resilience is not just hoped for, but relentlessly engineered. Each person stepping further into their power, each day inventing not just new solutions, but a new definition of what's possible. Reflecting on this journey so far, you find yourself pausing in the hush that settles just before dawn, a moment between what has been forged in the crucible of adversity and the horizon still shrouded in a mantle of mist. The air feels different here, quieter, but pulsing with the nervous thrill of the unknown, as if every lesson, every small act of courage, is an invisible seam holding together the world you're learning to create. Out on the field, the landscape has changed. Where once you saw only barriers masked as boundaries, now you sense patterns rising. A web of connections spun between moments of intuition, resolve, and the willingness to step forward even without a visible path. You've tasted the raw edge of uncertainty, but instead of recoiling, you stand a little taller, aware that every forward inch has been hard-won. In the makeshift mess hall, conversations drift like tendrils of steam curling up from chipped mugs. People listen more intently now, the cadence of their voices marked by a subtle humility, an eagerness to gather what the other has gleaned, a willingness to reflect before reacting. Beneath the surface, something essential is knitting itself into the fabric of their interactions, a kinship born not out of shared hardship alone, but out of a collective decision to move differently, to let possibility become the current that carves new channels through the old, resistant stone. The beauty of it isn't loud or brash. It's felt most in the pauses, the gentle nods, the eye contact that lingers a moment longer, as if acknowledging an inner transformation that has no name yet. The mechanics of progress hum on in the background, yet machinery tells only part of the story. With each hour that passes, there is a deeper stirring. The sense that meaning itself has been subtly reoriented, that each challenge is no longer a test to be endured, but a riddle inviting creative unraveling. There's an unfamiliar confidence quietly blooming in the chest, fragile yet persistent, the sort that arises from recognizing that strategy grows most fruitfully in the soil of lived experience. Here, amid the tools and chalk-marked floors, anticipation pulses, not the restless hope for rescue, but an inward recognition that you carry within you the spark for illumination, no matter how overcast the sky becomes. Moments of tension still slide through the narrative, of course, as they must in any story worth telling. But now, tension is more than discomfort. It is the pressure beneath the surface that shapes and sharpens resolve, much like the slow, relentless force that polishes a river stone smooth. You catch yourself seeking out these moments instead of sidestepping them, compelled by a quiet faith that they hold the raw ingredients of tomorrow's breakthrough. The changing roles and shifting alliances within your circle are more than strategies. They become the heartbeat of something larger, an ongoing testament to what happens when you choose not only to adapt, but to rise together. Consider how even the intangible has begun to feel solid beneath your feet, like a new landscape emerging each time you dare to trust the compounding effect of small risks. There is a sense of gathering momentum, a barely perceptible quickening, as if all that has been built in silence is waiting for a single, decisive moment to reveal itself. You stand at the threshold, neither looking back nor straining for the finish, but suspended on that exhilarating edge where insight, readiness, and integrity converge. The next step is not a leap into the unknown, but a stride fueled by the synthesis of all that has accumulated, small victories and stumbles alike. Out in the gathering light, the air is thick with the promise of further transformation. Every choice seems to shimmer with greater consequence. Every word spoken weighted with a conviction that was, once, a distant ideal and is now embodied. You've arrived at a precipice where the sum of every whispered intention, every act of conscious innovation, and every quietly held belief gathers its energy for what comes next. As you breathe in this charged silence, you cannot help but sense that the ultimate turning point is close, so close it brushes the edges of your awareness, inviting you to step through with open eyes, ready to claim what is finally yours. Night yielded, and in the fragile blush of first morning, the battered hangar seemed to breathe with quiet anticipation. The air was still moistened by the memory of struggle, a chorus of hammers, whispered doubts, and dreams spun beneath flickering bulbs. Paul Pappy gun leaned against the edge of his workbench, calloused hands resting on the cool metal. The war rumbled just beyond the hills, but inside, a different kind of battle had already reached its end. His daughter, Lucy, emerged from behind a stack of crates, the last page of her journal fluttering in her grasp. Around them, the crew moved with a new cadence, not rushed or frantic, but purposeful, each step guided by something deeper than mere need. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the silence said everything words could not. Gratitude flickered there, a recognition of the journey that had demanded each of them walk through fire and scarcity, and in the walking, become more than their circumstances. Lucy smiled softly as she tucked her journal away. "You know, Dad," she began, "I used to think strength was all about having the right tools. Now I wonder if it's knowing how to use what others overlook." Her words hung between them, gentle but unyielding, a bridge from the trials they had endured to the possibilities that now stretched out ahead. Pappy nodded, his gaze drifting toward the flight line, where the bombers, once orphaned by convention, stood ready. Behind each mechanical transformation lay a tapestry of risk, hope, and humility. What had once been absence of resources, of recognition, became space for ingenuity to flourish. In this crucible, a truth had revealed itself, that what the world labels as lack often conceals hidden stores of brilliance. The war had taught their hands to repair steel, but adversity had sculpted their hearts, engineered them to see more, reach further, and trust the latent wealth in imagination and resolve. The crew gathered, laughter mixing with the steady rhythm of final checks. The old stories of can't, not enough, and maybe later had faded, replaced by the quiet rebellion of those who dared to act in the shadow of convention. Beyond the concrete and corrugated walls, sunlight spilled across the tarmac, gilding each figure with a sense of completion. It was not victory in the way the world measures such things, but an arrival at a crossroads. Each person having learned that the most profound shifts begin not with approval from above, but with a decision inside, to persist, to trust, to excavate meaning from the very bedrock of limitation. Lucy looked to her father, pride and tenderness mingling in her expression. "You know, I think we made more than machines ready. Maybe we're ready too, ready to ask different questions, take bolder risks, see opportunity where the old us only saw a wall." Pappy grinned, weathered face transformed by something luminous and alive. His reply was simple, spoken low, made powerful only by its certainty. "We are. And so's anyone willing to start." In the hush that followed, something took root, a sense that what they'd built was not just a momentary triumph, but a lasting inheritance. The lessons encoded in every trial would, like echoes, ripple through all that followed. The world beyond still spun with scarcity and doubt, but within each of them now stirred the unshakable knowledge that boundaries are seldom real, and that self-mastery is not reserved for those favored by luck, but for those who choose to answer difficulty with creation. The rumble of engines announced a new day. As the old hangar emptied, the promise lingered in the golden air, the power to transform, to innovate, to thrive. It was theirs now, elemental as breath. And as each carried that inheritance into the uncertain morning, it became clear, the real abundance begins when you dare to let adversity awaken something original and unbreakable within yourself, and step forward, not asking for permission, but bringing your own light wherever you go.